it's not inevitable to have a miserable existence. Like, it's not inevitable to be miserable, to be depressed or whatever. Like, people just sort of like, oh, well, that's life. No, it's not. Like, that's not life.
I want to die. Like, that's so Gen X.
Yeah, it's just like, right. It's like, no, fuck that.
Fangirling, the show where we give respect where respect is due. Usually I'm in San Diego talking to artists, but I am in New York right now at the Flux Factory doing a residency, so I'm really stoked to be able to chat with my fellow Fluxers. And today I am joined by the one, the only, Noah Phillips. Noah Phillips is a writer, social worker, and artist, and fellow Fluxer. So I'm really excited to be here with Noah today and to talk about your practice. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
We are socially distant on the set, so no super spreaders here. We are doing our social distant interviews. That's why we're on two different screens. On the show, we make fangirl cards to the people we admire who have influenced us. And you've chosen Noah Linda Berry as your person to fan out over. So could you just describe who she is and why you admire her?
Sure. Linda Berry is, I think, the best description I ever heard of her. She's like a creative art witch, and she's one of those people who is really adept at creating a space where just like creativity happens and imagination gets funneled. And so she was a cartoonist, is a cartoonist, and has written books. And I came to know her because she was teaching at University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I was studying, and she did a couple of different really interesting classes.
So you brought with you today some composition books, and that you mentioned earlier is influenced by your time with Linda Berry and those classes. Could you just explain that? What would she? Because it's different from a regular sketchbook, right?
Yeah, it's not a sketchbook. The way that she always describes it is it's a place where all these different things that are happening in your mind can kind of land and kind of take shape and exist. So she had encouraged us to take notes for other classes in the comp book, to do our homework assignments in the comp book, to just kind of make marks and practice, to paste in receipts. It's kind of a cross between a sketchbook and a scrapbook and a notebook, and it's a place. It's a
no rules.
No rules. Yeah. She would have a sort of progression in the class where you would have an art kit with some fancy watercolor kits and stuff. But you'd start off with the crayons, and the sort of lesson that she taught us, it was very sort of Karate Kid style. We had to sort of color in, getting as much crayon on the page as possible, full sheets in our comp book and on handouts and stuff. Because it was really about sort of the full body experience of, because it takes a long time to do that.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's like a physical process.
You almost need to kind of melt them on something hot or
well, you just need to end up being ruthless, and not be afraid to break them. So that's how I was reintroduced to crayons, and then I love them because they're so cheap, so you're not precious about them, and they can create some really vivid and intense colors if you really put your back into it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Something like watercolor, to use it, you have to be tender. You know, you're stroking the page. You're right. This you just have to be ruthless. Yeah.
I have a good crayon, for example.
Yeah, that took some effort.
Yeah, it took a lot of time. She has a blurb about the comp book in her book, which I have with me.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Which I can say. I'd rather say her words than sort of butcher them as filtered through my mind. Where is it? So here's her section on crayons. So these are two books that she wrote sort of inspired by, or as a result of the classes that she was doing in Wisconsin at the time.
Okay.
So my work, for instance, and the work from like a bunch of her classes, she like scanned and is in here. Your composition notebook is the backbone of this class. It's a place rather than a thing. Your daily diary work will happen here, along with note-taking, story writing, drawing, and anything else you'd like to use it for. You should try to keep it with you as much as you can. And you trace your hand on the first page, which is what I do.
Which is like your stamp on it, your owning.
What? So here, tracing your hand can give you an odd and pleasant feeling. You've done this before, but it's been a long time. Humans have been tracing their hands onto surfaces for thousands of years. It's something I turn to when I'm stuck. I can always trace my hand. I like to think of it as my image self pushing up from the other side of the page. The hand is both me and someone else, a representative of another location and transport there if I'm willing, and also able. The thing most needed is the ability to tolerate the lines, shapes, and phrases coming from your hands so you can follow where it takes you. So that's like kind of the key thing that I learned from her.
Yeah.
Is that that class was the first time since I was a kid when I started to re-embrace like intuition and re-embrace sort of starting something without knowing where it was going and planning it out in advance and letting it take you somewhere.
Yeah.
And that, in retrospect, is a lot of what's exciting to me about working in mental health. Because so much of people's distress comes from trying to repress their intuition and repress stuff that they don't know about, like, or repress entities in their minds, right? Or feelings that they're having, and sort of like throwing up smoke screens. And so something that's amazing about her art and also about the kinds of therapy or healing practices that interest me have to do with actually giving expression to whatever it is that's inside you and like letting it come out.
Right, yeah. And that's so, like, that makes so much sense. But yeah, so many things in society now are like, you don't know the answer, then you better not do it, or you don't know how this is going to end up or where this sparks from. Like, yeah, there seems to be this need to like categorize everything.
And also to take credit for everything. Because because it's like me, I created this artwork. Like I fixed my sanity. I did all this. But the truth is that, like, I, like Noah Phillips, like, insofar as I define myself as just like the purely rational part of me, like the purely strategic, thinking things through part of me, which is like a serious part of me, but like there's a limit to how much I can do. I have to like open myself to being a channel for other stuff in order for really like magic to happen.
Right.
And magic is so great when it happens.
Yeah, and it always comes from some spontaneity between people or, something else than yourself. I wonder, that's interesting you bring up the credit thing. Like, I feel like that has something to do with, like, consumerist society. Like, it has to be one thing that you can buy or, one method of thinking that's going to fix everything. But
yeah, I definitely think it's really individualistic for sure. And yeah, I think consumerism, because we know on some level that we can't do it by ourselves, but we still feel like we have to. That makes us feel inadequate because we expect ourselves, we feel like we have to, but we know that we can't. So then the answer is to consume so that we like close that gap. Like, well, if I buy a fancier brand of coffee or fix my mental problem and like take Adderall or look nicer or like I'll be better, right? Like I'll be good enough.
Oh yeah. I always think, for me it's jackets. If I get this jacket, it's going to change my life.
I feel that way about jackets also.
Dude, jackets can do anything, yeah.
I love jackets. They're magic.
All right. You recently had your curatorial debut here at the Flux Factory Gallery, and The show was called Gifts of the Wound.
The Gift in the Wound.
The Gift in the Wound.
Through my work in the mental health system,
Mm-hmm.
and my work thinking about mental health, something that's occurred to me that is not something that the predominant biomedical model of mental health acknowledges is that, first of all, everybody has darkness, everybody has shadows, everybody has traumas with a big T or a little t, depending on, but your experience. But everybody has reasons why they cut themselves off from their greatness, their like inherent human greatness, and it's often those fears or those shadows or those traumas that, when processed and sort of lovingly but sort of firmly looked at, can teach us what our greatness really is. So they're both kind of the thing holding us back and also the key to what you're here for.
Right, because you did overcome that, for the fact that you're still existing means that you went through that trauma and you're past it. So you have something special.
You have something special,
yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, good job, you survived. It's once you've really looked at a thing, right, you've looked at your wound and examined your wound, which can take years and years and years, and or a lifetime, or depending on your metaphysics, many lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
You have an insight to share with the world that is a unique insight that will help the world. And so that was what the show was about.
Oh, yeah.
The show is about the gift in the wound, and it started off by being about mental health.
So when you were working for the public health, New York City Public Health, what was your role? What kind of, were you seeing patients or were you organizing?
So I was a peer specialist, and on a pathway home team. Peers have been around forever. Right?
What does that mean?
So a peer specialist in this context is like someone who's been through it themselves, helping someone else who's going through it now.
Okay.
And sharing their experiences, like exactly sort of this gift in the wound stuff.
Okay.
But someone who's, for instance, been psychiatrically hospitalized, who's now with additional training helping people who are currently psychiatrically hospitalized get through it. And the idea, and this is true, is that peers, people who have been through it themselves, have a lot to offer. And perhaps even more to offer than someone who's giving them, cognitive behavioral therapy or even a prescription for Seroquel or something, right? That sort of human connection aspect of it, and the trust.
Yeah.
Which it's hard to trust someone who's locked you up and is not letting you out.
Right.
Much of the field of mental health is a band-aid because in my opinion, our society is structured in a way that and has underlying ideologies, our underlying worldview fosters alienation and trauma and lack of healing, and a sense of meaninglessness in our lives. And so,
and what do you think that stems from? Is it that just the get money, work till you die, and then go home and watch Netflix? Is that what you're talking about, or what do you think that? I know it's a big question, but
I mean, it is a really big question. What would we need to fix in order to...
when you're saying, it's, a Band-Aid because the larger society supports alienation? Like, what is it? What aspect do you think of our society is the thing that's, I don't know, could you even point to one thing, or is it just the truth of how we live?
I mean, it gets into kind of spiritual realms. Is there one thing I could point to? As like, if we fix this, then we would fix it all. I mean, so in my mind, I spend my time organizing in mental health. Because I think that if we learn, and this ties back into the Linda Berry stuff too, because if we learn how to embrace the parts of ourselves that are not necessarily rational and critical, and we learn to reintegrate old wisdom into our lives, then that will go a long way. I mean, on a really, and a long way, right, especially, like, we're so cut off from each other. We're so cut off from the planet. We're so cut off from people who don't look like us, right? Like, for all of the technological advances and, like, increases in life expectancy and, like, wonderful things that modern society has brought us, deaths of despair are skyrocketing around the world. And
now being physically distant.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. So I'm not sure there's like,
Well, yeah, it's more than just one thing, but I really like how you put that, because I can see that in your art practice, like your artwork and your curatorial work. Like, it seems like that really drives you, this encouraging people to be intuitive, to go back to like these kind of ancient intuitive modes of narration, or I don't know, like
what it really is in a way is like, I want, if there was like a message that I could tell the world and also tell myself.
Yeah, tell it. This is the spot.
I'm looking directly into the camera.
Yeah.
Like, humans aren't, it's not inevitable to have a miserable existence. Like, it's not inevitable to be miserable, to be depressed or whatever. Like, people just sort of like, oh, well, you know, that's life. No, it's not. Like, that's not life.
I want to die. Like, that's so Gen X.
Yeah, it's just like, right. It's like, no, fuck that.
Yeah.
Like, right, like, it's not, you don't have to hate yourself. You don't have to hate society. You don't have to hate any of it. Like, maybe the premise could be that, like, humans, and, like, you specifically, viewer, were, like, put here to do great things and be great in the world. And, like, love fully and be fully alive, right? And I'm, you know, not there. I'm not, like, that person. But, like, maybe that's reality. Mm-hmm. And, like, our task is to get to that place and remove and move through the things keeping us from that. So, I mean, I guess if there was a thing I could shift, it might be cynicism. Mm-hmm. It might be irony. I fucking hate irony. Because irony is a way of, like, it's like cynicism, but, like, pretending not to be, but pretending to be. It's like,
yeah.
It's just, no, just do the thing, right? Just, like, be who you are. Don't pretend that you're,
yeah.
Like, it's just too complicated.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because I found myself too, like, I'm just so, with artwork especially, you know, it's like I'm really into just earnest things.
Yeah.
They feel so fresh, you know, like
that's where life comes from. Like, be earnest. Like,
yeah.
It's hard enough. It's because, like, until I started trying to be earnest, I mean, and I've always been, like, somewhat earnest, but, like, you kind of assume, like, oh, I could be earnest if I wanted to be. Like, oh, I could, like, this is, like, the more sophisticated choice.
Yeah, to be a cold and ironic.
Right.
Yeah.
But, like, if once you stop doing that and you're, like, actually try to be earnest, it's fucking hard.
It's hard,
It's so hard. You're like, wait, who am I, though? Like, and then you have to figure it out. and you fill comic books with
Yes.
questions of like, wait, what? How do I be earnest? How do I be a full human being? I don't even know. Oh, this is my Valentine. This is my real Valentine to Linda Berry, by the way.
Woo!
It's hard, and you're like, you go on this journey, and that's like the journey that we're supposed to be on. We're not supposed to be on the like, oh, I hate myself, I'm gonna watch Netflix for 6,000 hours
That's
now.
not a journey. That's just
That's a numbing
stagnation.
mechanism.
Yeah,
It's literally a way to numb yourself.
totally.
It's an opiate. Netflix is the opiate of the masses. You kind of imagine like, oh, well, if I'm earnest, like, what if that leads me to do yoga? And then I'll be just like one of those yoga people. Or like, oh, if then I'll like make an art project and like, then I'll just be like one of those art people. It's like, no, if you're really doing it, then it'll be unique.
You're not going to be a stereotype. And it's so interesting because I have had that conversation with people where they're like, well, I just don't want to be like that person. And it's like, you won't be if you're you. Like,
You'll be you.
Yeah, you'll be you doing that thing. Like, oh.
And then once you start doing it, you'll be like, and I have this feeling all the time of like, I imagine that, a group of people that do a thing. Like this dance that I did, right? Like, I was having double vision. I did this like...
Yeah, can you give them some context?
Yeah, I did this enactment of a personal fable that came to me when I was doing internal family systems therapy. Which you can go look up. Can I just say that?
Yes, that's fine. Well, you can link it. Yeah.
Look up internal family systems therapy. It's a therapeutic modality that is about identifying and building relationships with various parts of yourself. And I was doing some IFS work over the summer, and this kind of fable came to me. I took this personal fable and kind of tried to treat it like one of these myths, and so put this little dance together that I called La Danza de la Pulga, the dance of the flea.
That piece was very earnest, I felt.
It was super earnest, and it was uncomfortable to be so earnest with people, because it was like literally part of the thing is the like climax of the piece is that the prince who was slapped by his father when he was young for being loud has never spoken since. And so he's like a young adult, and he's out of the castle, and he's out on this hunt, and he's sort of drawn farther away from the castle by this sort of like very majestic deer. And he chases the deer far, far away from the castle, and finally he kills the deer and but by the time he gets back to the castle with this majestic deer, it's dark, and the guards can't see him down there, and he can't make any sound, so he can't get back in. And so he's stuck until the flea who was hiding on the deer bites him, and he screams. And so like part of the thing was like, I had never done this, right? Like, but the person who was the flea, who's a good friend of mine, grabbed me, and I was like, in prep, I was like, okay, and then I'm gonna scream, and it's gonna be loud, and I'm gonna be screaming, and like I was scared of screaming because it's like, because it's a scream, because it's so primal, and it's like you can't scream unearnestly. It's like the ultimate earnest thing to do, which is why it was the thing and why it was so scary. And so then everyone screamed.
Well, and I wanted to tell you, that was like a disturbing thing for me when I did it, is like, I had not let myself scream in so long that I like couldn't do it. Like it was all like raspy and terrible, and I'm like, I need to practice this in case I really need to scream one day.
End?
I mean, yeah, kind of, but I was like,
we should have screamed for longer then.
Yeah, well, I was disappointed in myself. Like, dude, girl, you got to work on your scream if you ever need it. So we are running out of memory, so we've got to wrap it up. This was such a great conversation. Maybe if people want to like keep track of your work in the future, is there anything like?
I don't have an Instagram, but I'm gonna update my website.
Cool. Yeah, your website's really good.
Thanks.
It's
www.noahphillips.net.
And you're going to be traveling this summer, or it's going to be summer. You're going to be traveling this year all over. So keep up with Noah, his great work. Thank you for the amazing conversation.
Thanks, Remi.
And everything. What did you end up with? Any marks?
I did this.
I like it. Yeah, so hold it
I
up.
didn't, wasn't concentrating on this.
That's all you need. Think.
Thank.
Think you,
Thank.
Noah. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Later.